widow and daughter rescued from wild bear, found love with brave lonely lumberjack. In the rugged mountains of 1880s Colorado, where survival depends on courage and the bonds we forge with others, a chance encounter between strangers will change 3 lives forever. When death comes prowling on 4 legs through the wilderness, salvation arrives from the most unexpected source, a man who has turned his back on the world, only to discover that sometimes the world won't let you stay hidden. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you already enjoyed this type of content, leave your like to support me. It really helps the channel grow. The September morning mist clung to the Rocky Mountain peaks like ghostly fingers, and Martha Sullivan pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she guided the wagon along the treacherous mountain pass. Beside her, 8-year-old Emma clutched her rag doll, eyes wide with wonder at the towering pines that seemed to scrape the belly of the gray clouds above. "Mama, how much further to Uncle Henry's ranch?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible, over the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of their aging mare, Bessie. Martha forced a smile, though worry gnawed at her insides like a persistent ache. 3 days had passed since they'd left the mining town of Silver Creek, and the mountain trail stretched endlessly before them. The letter from her late husband's brother had been clear: there was work for her at his ranch. A fresh start for her and Emma, after the typhoid fever had claimed her husband William 6 months ago. "Not much further now, sweetheart," Martha replied, hoping her voice carried more confidence than she felt. The truth was, she hadn't traveled these mountain roads since her wedding day 12 years ago. And the landmarks looked different now, changed by rockslides and the relentless march of seasons. The wagon lurched suddenly as Bessie shied to one side, nearly sending Emma tumbling from the wooden seat. Martha grabbed the reins tighter, her knuckles white against the leather straps. "Easy, girl," she murmured to the horse. But Bessie's ears were pinned back, her nostrils flaring with fear. That's when Martha heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The sound made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. She had heard that sound once before, years ago, when a black bear had wandered too close to their cabin in Silver Creek. "Mama," Emma whispered, instinctively pressing closer to her mother's side. 50 yards ahead, blocking the narrow mountain trail, stood the largest black bear Martha had ever seen, its massive shoulders hunched with raw power, its small dark eyes fixed on their wagon with predatory intelligence. The beast had to weigh at least 400 pounds, its thick autumn coat gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly reached for the old Winchester rifle secured beside the driver's seat. William had taught her to shoot, but she was no marksman, and one clean shot would be the difference between life and death for her and Emma. The bear rose onto its hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall, and released a roar that echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Bessie reared in terror, her hooves pawing at the air, and the wagon tilted dangerously backward. "Hold on, Emma," Martha shouted, fighting to control the panicked horse while keeping the rifle steady. But Bessie was beyond reason now. The mare bolted to the left, straight toward the steep embankment that dropped 30 feet into a rocky ravine. The wagon's left wheel caught on a boulder, and with a splintering crash of wood, the entire vehicle overturned. Martha felt herself flying through the air, Emma's scream piercing her ears like a knife. She hit the ground hard, the rifle spinning away into the underbrush, and the world exploded into stars and darkness. When consciousness returned, it could have been seconds or minutes later. Martha found herself lying on her side, her left shoulder screaming with pain. 10 feet away, Emma sat crying beside an overturned flour sack, apparently uninjured but terrified beyond words. The bear had followed them down the embankment and now stood between them and any hope of escape. It swayed from side to side, testing the air with its sensitive nose, and Martha knew with crystal clarity that they were about to die. She tried to push herself upright, but fire shot through her injured shoulder, and she collapsed back to the ground with a gasp of pain. The bear's attention snapped to the sound, and it began moving toward them with surprising grace for such a massive creature. "Mama," Emma sobbed. Martha closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, wrapping her good arm around her daughter and pulling her close. This couldn't be how their story ended. Not here. Not like this. The bear was 10 feet away now, close enough that she could smell its musky scent and hear the rhythmic huffing of its breath. Martha opened her eyes to look death in the face, and that's when she heard something that made no sense at all. The sound of someone whistling a low, melodic tune. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep bringing you these incredible tales. Jacob Jack Morrison had been cutting timber in these mountains for the better part of 15 years, and he prided himself on moving through the wilderness like a ghost. At 35, his hands were calloused from axe handles and his back was strong from hauling logs. But it was his ability to read the forest's moods that had kept him alive in this unforgiving country. The whistling was an old habit, something his father had taught him as a boy growing up in the Minnesota logging camps. Animals know your intentions before you do, the old man had said. Whistle, and you tell them you're just passing through, meaning no harm. Jack had been tracking the black bear for 3 days now, not to hunt it, but to understand its patterns. The beast had been raiding camps and frightening travelers along the mountain pass, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. He'd hoped to drive it deeper into the wilderness, away from human contact, but bears were stubborn creatures with long memories. When he heard the woman's scream echo through the canyon, followed by the crash of splintering wood, Jack's blood ran cold. He dropped his axe and ran toward the sound, his heavy boots finding purchase on the rocky slope with practiced ease. What he saw when he crested the ridge made his heart stop. Below in the ravine, an overturned wagon lay scattered like broken toys. And between a woman and young girl and any hope of safety stood the same bear he'd been tracking. 400 pounds of muscle and hunger, now agitated by the smell of fear. Jack had 3 choices. He could slip away quietly and pretend he'd never seen anything. He could make noise to try and scare the bear off, which might work or might enrage it further. Or he could do what every instinct in his body told him was suicide. Go down there and face the bear directly. For most of his adult life, Jack had chosen isolation over involvement, solitude over responsibility. 5 years ago, when the diphtheria outbreak had claimed his wife Sarah and their infant son, he'd walked away from everything that connected him to other human beings. The mountains had become his refuge, his penance, his prison. But looking down at that little girl's tear-streaked face, Jack saw his own son's eyes staring back at him, and the choice made itself. He pulled a hunting knife from his belt, a 12-inch blade his grandfather had forged in a Norwegian smithy 60 years ago, and began his descent into the ravine. The bear's hearing was keen, but Jack had learned to move like water, over stone, making no sound that would betray his approach. 20 feet, 15, 10. The bear sensed something and began to turn, but Jack was already in motion. He struck like a lightning bolt, driving the knife deep between the bear's shoulder blades, aiming for the heart with all the precision his years in the wilderness had taught him. The bear roared in pain and fury, spinning with shocking speed. To face this new threat, Jack rolled away from the massive paws, each one capable of crushing a man's skull like an eggshell, and came up in a crouch, the bloodied knife still in his hand. Get behind the wagon, he shouted to the woman and child, not taking his eyes off the wounded bear. The bear charged, and Jack dived to one side, feeling the wind from its passage ruffle his hair. He slashed at its flank as it thundered past, opening another wound. But the creature's thick hide and dense muscle made every injury a minor inconvenience rather than a killing blow. For what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jack and the bear danced their deadly waltz among the scattered supplies and broken wagon wheels. Jack was faster and more agile, but the bear was stronger and more durable, and both of them knew that one mistake would end the fight permanently. The bear's strength was beginning to fade. Jack could see it in the way the creature's movements were becoming sluggish, could hear it in the labored breathing. But his own energy was flagging too, and the knife felt heavy in his grip. The bear made one final, desperate charge, rising up on its hind legs to bring its full weight down on Jack's head. Jack threw himself backward, but his foot caught on a piece of broken harness, and he went down hard on his back. The bear crashed down like a falling tree, and Jack rolled frantically to one side. The creature's massive body hit the ground inches from his head, and then, with a final shuddering breath, the bear was still. Jack lay on his back for a long moment, chest heaving, staring up at the pine branches that swayed gently against the gray sky. He was alive. They were all alive. Somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Sir, the woman's voice was tentative, frightened. Sir, are you hurt? Jack pushed himself up to a sitting position and looked at the woman and child huddled by the overturned wagon. The woman was holding her left arm at an odd angle. Dislocated shoulder, he guessed, and dirt streaked her dark hair. But her green eyes were bright with intelligence and gratitude. I'm fine, Jack said, though his voice came out rougher than he'd intended. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 months, and the words felt foreign on his tongue. What about you and the little one? I think my shoulder is hurt, but Emma seems unharmed. The woman managed a shaky smile. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you for what you just did. Jack looked at the dead bear, then at the destroyed wagon, then at the steep walls of the ravine that would make climbing out with an injured woman and young child nearly impossible. The logical thing would be to help them to the main trail and send them on their way. That's what the old Jack would have done, the man who had chosen solitude over connection. But something had changed in those moments when death had stalked through the ravine. Something he thought had died with Sarah and little Thomas had stirred back to life. What's your name? He asked the woman. Martha Sullivan. This is my daughter, Emma. I'm Jack Morrison. He stood up and brushed dirt from his trousers. And I think we'd better get you to somewhere safe before dark. This isn't the only bear in these mountains. Jack's cabin was nothing like what Martha had expected, tucked into a natural clearing 2 miles from the ravine where they'd encountered the bear. The log structure was larger and more carefully built than the rough shelters most mountain men called home. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and glass, windows real glass, not the oiled paper she'd grown accustomed to, caught the last rays of afternoon sunlight. You built this yourself? Martha asked as Jack helped her down from the improvised stretcher he'd fashioned from pine branches and rope. Took 3 summers, Jack replied, his voice still carrying that rough quality she'd noticed in the ravine. He seemed uncomfortable with conversation, as if the words had to be dug out of him like precious metal from hard rock. Emma clutched her rag doll tighter as they approached the cabin door. The little girl hadn't spoken since the bear attack, and Martha worried about what kind of lasting fear might have taken root in her daughter's mind. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly warm and welcoming. Hand-carved furniture filled the main room, and bookshelves lined one entire wall. A stone fireplace dominated the far end, with cooking implements hanging neatly from iron hooks. Everything was clean and well-maintained, speaking to a man who took pride in his work despite his self-imposed isolation. Sit here, Jack said, guiding Martha to a wooden chair beside the fire. I need to look at that shoulder. Martha hesitated. She'd never been alone with a man who wasn't her husband, and despite Jack's heroic rescue, he was still a stranger. But her shoulder throbbed with increasing intensity, and she could see in Jack's eyes the kind of competence that came from experience with wilderness injuries. Emma, why don't you sit on the rug by the fire? Martha suggested, trying to keep her voice light despite the pain. Jack's hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her shoulder, his fingers probing carefully along the joint. It's dislocated, but not badly, he said. I'm going to have to put it back in place. It's going to hurt. Will it hurt as much as watching that bear charge at my daughter? Martha asked, attempting a weak smile. Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Pain, she thought, or recognition. No, he said quietly. Nothing hurts that much. The procedure was quick but agonizing. Jack gripped her arm and shoulder in his large hands and, with one smooth motion, guided the joint back into proper alignment. Martha bit down on the leather strap he'd given her and managed not to scream, though tears ran down her cheeks. There, Jack said, fashioning a sling from a piece of clean cloth. Keep it immobilized for a few days, and it should heal properly. As evening settled over the mountains, Jack prepared a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and cornbread. Emma, finally, began to relax, especially when Jack produced a wooden horse he'd carved and gave it to her without ceremony or fanfare. What's his name? Emma asked, the first words she'd spoken since the attack. That's for you to decide, Jack replied. A horse doesn't become real until it has a name. Thunder, Emma said immediately. Because he sounds like thunder when he runs. Jack nodded seriously. Thunder's a good name for a horse. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. I love reading your thoughts. After Emma fell asleep on a makeshift bed Jack had prepared near the fire, Martha and Jack sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. The events of the day felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else, but Martha knew that the fear and the gratitude would stay with her forever. You didn't have to help us, she said finally. Most men would have walked away. Jack stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. I had a son once. He would have been about Emma's age now. The simple statement hung in the air, between them like smoke. Martha felt the weight of grief in those words, the kind of loss that changes a person's entire relationship with the world. What happened? She asked gently. Diphtheria. 5 years ago. Took him and my wife both, 3 days apart. Jack's voice was steady, but Martha could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. I couldn't save them. Couldn't even be there when when it happened. I was out on a logging job, 2 days' ride away. Martha reached across the small space between their chairs and touched his hand briefly. I lost my husband to typhoid fever 6 months ago. I know how it feels to have the ground disappear from under your feet. Jack looked at her hand on his, and for a moment something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the recognition of shared understanding. Is that why you're traveling to your brother-in-law's ranch? He asked. Henry offered me work as a housekeeper. It's not much, but it's a chance for Emma and me to start over. Martha pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. We can't stay trapped in grief forever, as much as part of us wants to. Some of us can, Jack said quietly. Some of us choose to, Martha corrected gently. There's a difference. They talked until late into the night about loss and survival, about the beauty and brutality of mountain life, about the small daily choices that either isolate us or connect us to others. Martha found herself studying Jack's face in the firelight, noticing the way his expression softened when he spoke about his late wife, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when Emma had named the wooden horse. When she finally settled into the bed Jack had prepared for her in the cabin's small back room, Martha lay awake, listening to the wind in the pines and thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning she had been a widow, traveling alone with her daughter toward an uncertain future. Tonight she was under the protection of a man who had risked his life to save them. A man who carried his own deep wounds but had chosen compassion over self-preservation when it mattered most. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the distant peaks, a sound both lonely and wild. But inside the cabin, warm and safe by the dying embers of Jack's fire, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in months. A sense of possibility, fragile as new ice, but real nonetheless. 3 days passed before Martha's shoulder felt strong enough for travel, and during that time, something fundamental shifted in the careful distance Jack had maintained from the world. Emma's laughter filled the cabin as she played with the wooden horse, and Martha's quiet presence seemed to draw conversation from him like sunlight coaxing growth from frozen ground. On the morning they were to continue their journey to Henry's ranch, Jack stood at his workbench, running his fingers along the surface of a half-finished cradle he'd been carving 5 years ago. He'd never been able to bring himself to complete it or to burn it, and it had sat there like a monument to everything he'd lost. It's beautiful work, Martha said softly from behind him. Jack hadn't heard her approach, but he didn't startle. Over the past 3 days, he'd grown accustomed to her presence in ways that both comforted and unsettled him. It was for my son, he said. I never finished it. Martha moved to stand beside him, her good hand tracing the smooth curve of one rocker's. Thomas would have loved it. Jack looked at her in surprise. He couldn't remember telling her his son's name. You said it in your sleep, Martha explained gently. The first night you were having a dream. Jack felt heat rise in his cheeks. In 5 years of solitude, he'd grown unaccustomed to the vulnerability that came with letting someone close. Enough to witness his private moments of pain. I should get your wagon loaded, he said, turning away from the cradle. But Martha's hand on his arm stopped him. Jack, what if we didn't leave today? The question hung in the morning air like mist, full of possibility and uncertainty. Jack looked into Martha's green eyes and saw something that made his breath catch. Not pity or obligation, but genuine care, and perhaps the beginning of something deeper. Your brother-in-law is expecting you, Jack said carefully. Henry is expecting a housekeeper, Martha replied. Someone to cook and clean and help with the ranch work. But what if I wrote to him and explained that I'd found something better? Something that could be good for all of us. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching the wooden horse to her chest. Are we staying, Mama? Can we stay with Jack? Jack knelt down to Emma's level, his large hands gentle as he adjusted the collar of her dress. Your mama and I are just talking, little one. Would you like to stay? Emma nodded emphatically. Jack makes the best pancakes, and he taught me how to whittle, and he tells good stories about the animals in the forest. If this content is helpful to you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Martha looked at her daughter's eager face, then at Jack's careful expression, and felt her heart make a decision. Her mind was still trying to catch up with Emma. Why don't you go gather some berries for breakfast? The blue ones we found yesterday. After Emma skipped outside, Martha and Jack stood facing each other in the cabin that had become a sanctuary for all of them. I know this is sudden, Martha said. I know we've only known each other for 3 days, but I also know that when you saved us from that bear, you didn't just save our lives, you saved yourself too. I could see it in your eyes. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Martha's face to the windows that looked out. over the mountain valley he'd called home for 5 years. "I stopped believing in second chances a long time ago," he said finally. "So did I," Martha replied, "until 3 days ago." Jack moved to the fireplace, where the morning fire was burning low, and added another log. The flames leaped higher, filling the cabin with warm light and the scent of pine smoke. "I'm not an easy man to live with," he said without turning around. "I've spent 5 years learning how to be alone. I don't know if I remember how to be part of a family." Martha joined him by the fire, standing close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd used to wash her hair. "I've spent 6 months learning how to be a widow. I don't know if I remember how to be a wife. But maybe we could figure it out together." Jack turned to face her then, and Martha saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because if we do this, if we try to build something here, I don't think I could survive losing it again." Martha reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palms. "The only thing I'm sure of is that life is too short to let fear make our choices for us. And I'm tired of being afraid." Jack kissed her then, gently at first, as if she might disappear like morning mist. Then with growing certainty, as she kissed him back. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and healing, of two broken hearts daring to believe they might be stronger together than apart. When they broke apart, they could hear Emma's voice outside, singing a song about thunder horses and mountain bears, and both of them smiled. "I'll write to Henry today," Martha said. "I'll tell him I found work with a good man who needs a housekeeper and a family to fill his too quiet house. And I'll finish that cradle," Jack replied. "In case Thunder, the horse, needs a place to sleep." Martha laughed, a sound like silver bells in the mountain air. "I think Thunder would like that very much." 6 months later, when the first heavy snows of winter blanketed the mountain cabin, Martha Morrison stood at the window, watching her daughter and husband build a snow fort in the yard. Jack's laughter echoed off the canyon walls as Emma pelted him with snowballs, and Martha rested her hand on the gentle swell of her belly, where new life was growing. The cradle Jack had finished sat ready in the small room that would soon welcome their child. Not a replacement for the son they'd each lost, but a new beginning, a testament to the family they'd chosen to build together. Outside, Emma shrieked with delight as Jack lifted her onto his shoulders, and Martha thought about the strange mathematics of love, how it multiplied rather than divided, how it could grow in the most unexpected places, how it could transform a chance encounter with death into the beginning of everything that mattered. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily over the valley, riding the mountain winds with graceful ease. Martha watched it soar and thought about courage, not the kind that faced down wild bears, though that mattered too, but the kind that opened your heart to love again after loss had tried to close it forever. That was the real victory, she realized. Not surviving the bear attack, but choosing to believe in tomorrow despite yesterday's pain. Not finding safety in isolation, but discovering that the greatest adventures began when you stopped running from connection and started running toward it. What did you think of this story? Which part touched your heart the most? Leave your comment below. I love hearing your thoughts and responding to your questions. If you enjoyed this tale of love found in the wilderness, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss our incredible stories of courage, hope, and humanity.